Hello everyone, and welcome to this evening's webinar on mental health, working with the DPJ Foundation and Emma, and also Caroline Mason. We're going to focus on suicide awareness today. This is actually the first one in a series of 6 where we'll be looking at various aspects of mental health and supporting yourself, supporting your business, and actually looking out for other people as well. So just to get us started, a little bit of housekeeping. All of the attendees are muted. If you do have any questions at any point throughout the webinar, then just type in the question box, and you will those will pop up on our screen, and then we'll be able to ask Emma if you have got any questions for her. Feel free to type those throughout the presentation, but there will also be a time for questions at the end as well. We won't be asking anybody name, and we won't be naming anybody when we read out any questions, so please do just ask anything that's on top of your mind. We are aiming to finish for 8:30, so this is just really a brief highlight of the work that Emma does in the DPJ Foundation, and we are recording today so that it's a resource for the future, and it will be emailed. The recording will be emailed out to you as well afterwards. So just to get us started with a little bit of introduction, I'm Tess Howe, the Senior Skills Manager at AHDB, and with Caroline Mason we set up the Mental Health Roundtable. Caroline will give you a little bit more detail on that in a minute. Emma, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Emma Picton-Jones. I'm the founder of the DPJ Foundation, and we're a mental health charity which looks at supporting anybody within agriculture who's got poor mental health.
And Caroline, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Caroline Mason, Head of Agriculture and Fish Sustainability at the Co-op. And like Tess said, we came together earlier this year because we wanted to do more to raise awareness around mental health. And so we brought together all of the retailers and a number of people from across the industry, just as a way of raising awareness and finding better ways to support each other and our mental well-being.
That's fantastic, thank you very much. And it really is about, this whole collaboration is about us all working together and showing that there is help for anybody and everybody out there, and hopefully over the next 6 weeks you'll realise we're the right place for your help that you need or somebody else needs. You'll know exactly where to send them in the future. So without further ado, Emma, it's suicide. It's not something anybody wants to talk about. Why do you think it's so important right now?
For me personally, I think that having been directly affected by suicide is something that I think that is hugely important that everybody talks about anyway. I think that it's really prevalent at the moment. We're dealing with a lot of isolation specifically right now. We're also dealing with a lot of issues within the sector. I think, to be honest with you, we're always dealing with different issues in the sector, and that's part of the reasons why we do have such difficult issues and lots of problems with mental health within the sector. But actually, agriculture carries one of the highest rates of suicide above any other occupation. So we're right up there with vets and dentists, with the top suicide rates in the whole of the UK. And really kind of one of the main reasons why that is because as a sector and as a farmer in this kind of occupation, we've got a lot of stress that we deal with. And so I put the picture of the bucket up because I very much believe that we all walk around with this big bucket on our heads all the time. And in day-to-day life, this bucket gets filled up with anything and everything. It could be something as simple as you woke up late this morning and that stressed you out. It might be a death of an animal. It might be a TB test. It could be milk prices. It could be anything that's happening in your life is going to fill up that bucket. It could be kids. It might not necessarily be related to kind of your job and that kind of thing. And as that bucket fills up and up and up, if we don't release the tap on that bucket, eventually it fills up to the point where it overflows. That's potentially a mental health problem, and that's when suicide become into place as well. What's really important to remember though is suicide can also be a snap decision. So although it is quite often linked with depression and can quite often be something which is at the end of perhaps a potentially short or long battle with depression, it can also be a snap decision. And one of the reasons that we've got such a high suicide rate in the sector is because we've got access and means available to those sorts of things to be able to take our own lives when our bucket is full. So it's really important that we understand how to empty our bucket and the ways that we can do that.
That's really interesting, thank you. And it probably sounds really straightforward, and people often say we never knew that they were thinking that way. What would be the signs that would help people identify if someone was struggling?
So yeah, like I said, a lot of people will turn around afterwards and say, oh gosh, you know, no one ever saw it coming. And that was very true in my circumstances. When my husband took his own life, there was very much this idea that everybody around us was shocked, and I was more shocked than anybody. But actually, in retrospect, when you start looking back, you could see there was quite a lot of signs there, and there were quite a lot of things that pinpointed to what was going to happen and how it happened. So a few of these are on the screen, as you can see there in front of you. Expression of hopelessness and helplessness is this whole idea of there's no point in me carrying on. You know, no one thinks I'm worthless, I'm useless, the whole world is against me, that kind of hopelessness and helplessness. Overwhelming shame or guilt about something as well, and it might not necessarily be founded guilt or shame, but some people can feel shame or guilt about certain things as well. Dramatic change in appearance or personality, if somebody's changing all of a sudden, and I can't underestimate that change enough. The change in the way that somebody behaves and looks, that it gives off a really good kind of indication that something's not quite right, and that gut feeling that you get when you see those changes. Irrational or bizarre behavior, it might be very strange things happening. It could also be sort of certain things, like, for example, we've had people in the past who we've kind of supported and dealt with, who've all of a sudden decided to sell everything. You know, everything is gone and sold and gone to market, and now everybody around that person realizes that this is a very strange decision. They couldn't really see where it was coming from, but then no one really questioned it, because we tend to just presume people know what they're doing and kind of presume that people are okay. So we've got to take action when we see that irrational, bizarre behavior. Start looking at it as, is this could potentially be a problem. It could be lack of sleep as well. Insomnia is a massive problem if people aren't sleeping properly, and lack of interest in the future. People who aren't able to kind of see past the point. You know, it's very much this idea, well, there's no point, I'm not going to be alive then, and you know, there's no point, I'm not going to be here to see that out, and this kind of idea that there's no future for them and they can't really see past that point. It could be something as simple as written or spoken intention. It could be somebody simply saying, I just don't want to be alive anymore, I'd rather die, I'd rather not be here. Any kind of way that it's put, we've got to take those written or spoken intentions really seriously. And unfortunately, when people tend to say these things or kind of write them down perhaps on social media, we tend to look at them as a bit of attention seeking, when actually if somebody is taking the time to write that or say that, they are seeking attention, and that's okay to pay them attention at that point, because there's obviously something that's not quite right with that person. And it could be things like giving away possessions, putting affairs in orders, and you know, farmers are great kind of lovers and carers of their land and their animals, and quite often they'll put things in place and get things sorted before they actually decide to end their life, if it's a decision they've taken. So just look out for those kind of strange behaviors, anything in your gut that tells you something isn't right. For me, there was quite a few different things in the kind of lead up to Dan passing away. There was an attempt at suicide when about a year and a half before he actually died. There were certain things that he was saying. He was very much of the hopelessness and helplessness. It was this idea of, you're fine without me, you don't need me around, you can manage. And you know, it was this idea of he was always kind of making sure that the world would be okay without him, and if he left, then that was how it was. So anything that gives you those gut kind of feelings that something's not right.
Okay, that's really interesting. And it's interesting with you going through that yourself as well, Emma, just to bring it home to people that it can be going on alongside you, can't it, without you really being able to do too much.
Yeah, and I think that the trouble is that too often not, we tend to just kind of bypass these things that happen. We're trying to brush them off. And if I'm honest, a lot of people are probably like me and quite naive. I honestly kind of thought all along that, well, he's got a wife and he's got children and he's got a business, he's making a living, why would he want to die? But actually it doesn't quite work like that. And you know, when he left quite a lengthy letter, and as part of that letter there was some information which said, you know, one of the reasons that he felt like he had to die was in order to make mine and my children's life better. Now, you and I know that that's ridiculous and it doesn't work like that, but that shows you the mindset of somebody who is suicidal and who is suffering really severely with poor mental health. So don't ever underestimate what somebody could potentially going through, and statistically, you know, suicide is really high risk, and we've got to kind of take note of that.
So what would be seen as the risk factors, Emma?
Okay, so the risk factors that you're looking out for, and these are the types of people who could potentially be at risk for suicide. anybody who is socially isolated, and you know, we're all going through a period of real social isolation at the moment. We are kind of breaking out of that, but historically as a sector we're a very isolated group of people. You know, I live in Pembrokeshire, and really we're not overly rural where we are. You know, we're kind of socially isolated, but we're not, compared to kind of other places across the UK. We've got some people who their closest supermarket is over an hour and a half away, so that kind of social interaction, people who aren't going to see people, who don't go out, who don't meet other people, who don't have that human interaction, they're really high risk, because as a group of, you know, as humans, we need that human interaction, and without that human interaction, that's when our kind of mental health can really suffer. So anybody who's not having social interaction, who's hugely isolated, people who've got mental health problems as well, you know, anybody who's suffering from depression, anxiety, PTSD, any other mental health is really high risk for suicide. So it's something to be aware of, that if you know that somebody's suffering with a mental health issue, there is the potential there that suicide could be an option. If there's a family history as well, so statistically, if somebody within your family has committed suicide, then you are at higher risk. It's a really sad fact, and as a mother of 2 children whose father has committed suicide, it is quite a horrific fact, knowing that they're statistically at higher risk than any of their peers because of what happened to their dad. But it's just something to be aware of, that if you know it's happened within the family unit, then that could potentially be putting others at risk as well. If somebody's made previous attempts as well, that could give you a good indication that, okay, just because they survived it the first time doesn't mean it can't happen again. So it's something to be aware of. This was exactly the case with Dan. He attempted suicide when he was 21. He also attempted suicide again 18 months before he died. And all of these things, although I knew they'd happened, again, it was that naivety that, oh no, it'll be fine and everything's okay, when actually it's not quite the case. If somebody's also going through illness, so a lot of the time now, people who are suffering with physical illnesses, perhaps cancer, for example, they get support with their mental health as well, because actually dealing with the physical health is quite tricky to deal with mentally. You imagine kind of farming full time, and all of a sudden you're being told that you've got to go into hospital to have treatment. You know, how do you deal with that? How do you kind of hand that over? And it's a really difficult thing to process. So be aware that kind of the physical element of illness can definitely impact on your mental health and kind of lead to suicide as well. But also financial worries and crisis as well. And what I quite often say with this is that you don't have to be in financial crisis to be worrying about money. You could be in too much money and worry about money because you don't want the taxman to have it. You know, so whatever kind of that might be, if you know that there's financial worries or financial crisis, and that's something that as a charity we've been really aware of recently as well, especially with the prices of meat dropping. The concerns that a lot of farmers have around kind of imports and things like that are happening currently as well. That is a huge worry for some of these, specifically the smaller farmers, but also the large scale farmers as well, because their income could drop significantly and that could lead them into financial crisis. So all of these things are risks and things you should be looking out for.
And Caroline, from your perspective, I mean, you've done quite a lot of co-op, haven't you, to try and mitigate some of those risks. Do you want to go through any of that?
Yeah, so with our farming groups, because we have a number of farming groups across all of the different sectors, so beef, lamb, pork, dairy, and chickens, we spend a lot of time actually talking with our farmers, and we bring them together as groups, and we do a lot of knowledge transfer that's more around things that are going on in the industry that might have an impact on their farm, or how can they continually to keep on improving their business. But a key factor of that is that we're actually bringing people together, and so they're part of a community. And last year we spent a lot of time actually in the right way trying to talk about mental health and just getting people to find a way to be okay with talking about how they're feeling or things that they're struggling with. But I also wanted to make sure myself and my team, because we interact a lot with farmers in rural communities, that we were better prepared to understand the signs of when somebody might be struggling. So we actually did a training session with Emma from DPJ and Stephanie from Yellow Wellies, because we wanted to understand the signs better in other people, but equally be aware of our own personal mental well-being. So it's something that's really important to me, it's important to my team, but it's also important to the co-op as a business. So, and we will continue to keep on championing, raising awareness on mental health, and it really is okay to do that, and it's really important to do it as well.
So you mentioned about the high figures in agriculture, Emma. Why do you think that is?
There's a few different reasons why. I mean, as you can see from the statistics here, that men are far higher risk of suicide than women. There's a few different reasons for that. One of the main reasons is, unfortunately, when men attempt suicide, they tend to use more methods that more likely to result in death. So they're more likely to choose things like death by hanging, death by using a gun, that kind of thing. Whereas women are far more likely to choose things like such as overdose, which is you're far more likely to survive something like that. Also, women are far better at talking, and generally kind of they're better looked after. I think as a kind of female, having grown up and had children, you know, you're very well looked after by your GP. You're checked on by when you're having a baby and after the baby, and health visitor checks. You're always looked after, whereas men don't have that same kind of checkups throughout their life. They're not looked after in the same way that we are as women. And so because of those discrepancies, the suicide rate amongst men is an awful lot higher. In our sector, we are governed by a very male-dominated sector, and, you know, although there are a lot of fantastic women coming up through the ranks in farming and have been women for many years, it is hugely male-dominated, and because of that, that adds to why we've got such a high suicide rate. But as I mentioned earlier, the sad fact comes down to we've got the means available. So I think what's really important to kind of remember at this point is that just because we've got the means available, you know, it doesn't mean taking those means away is going to solve the problem. I learned the hard way, and I very much kind of, when I had this understanding that Dan was suicidal, I had it in my head that if I took everything away that he could potentially harm himself with, then it wouldn't happen. But it's not the case, because if you take something away, they're going to just go and find something else, and you don't actually deal with the problem in hand. So there's certain things that you can do to deal with the problem in hand, but actually, as you can see from the figures here, that suicide is a massive problem, and it's something we've really got to start talking about. We've got to start being open and honest and having these conversations, because the reality of it is, I've never met a farmer who doesn't know a farmer who's killed himself.
It is, and it's a really sad reality, isn't it, that we're all working with. And I think everybody that's probably logged on this evening, and ourselves involved as well, know somebody that has attempted it or tried it, and it's, yeah, it's a sad reality. Emma, we've got one question, and then it means you're putting your teacher voice back on and slowing down a little bit.
Oh, I knew that. I told you it would be a problem. Yeah, I will try. Sorry.
It's Emma's passion for this and helping people. It's just it's hard to slow down, isn't it, Emma? No, fine. So you have, I mean, you've touched on this. How do we actually help people? Can we even help people in these situations when they've made their mind determined?
Yeah, you certainly can help people, and one of the most important things is about talking about suicide. I think if you've got any concern whatsoever, if you've seen any of the signs we've spotted, if you've seen any of the risk, if you know the person's at risk, one of the best things that you can do is just ask them if they're suicidal. You know, by asking that question, you're giving them the opportunity to talk about something, and all you've got to remember is that bucket that's sitting on their head. And if you're asking them about suicide, you're giving them the opportunity to empty that bucket just a little bit. And talking is one of the best ways that you can empty the bucket. So when you're talking to somebody and you're asking that question, what's really important is that you don't say things like, you're not going to do something stupid, are you? Or you're not planning on killing yourself, are you? Just ask them outright in a concerned and caring manner, are you thinking about killing yourself? Is suicide something you've thought about? And if they do say yes, then encourage conversation around that. Find out lots of things about how long have you been thinking about that? You know, have you planned how you're going to do it? Have you talked to anyone about it? What's led you to this point? The more you can get them talking, the more you're emptying that bucket. You want to try and show empathy instead of sympathy. So instead of, it's not that bad, don't worry about it. And as British people, we do tend to do that. We tend to say, oh, Mrs. Jones down the road had that and she's much better now, you know, don't worry about it. It doesn't work like that. He doesn't care or she doesn't care about Mrs. Jones. All that's important at that point in time is what she's going through or he's going through. So instead of don't worry about it, things will get better, say, you know, you've gone through a really difficult time. You know, it must be really tricky what you're going through right now, because being told kind of that what you're going through and how you're feeling is okay, and having that kind of validated is hugely important. Keep the person talking, just get it in your head. The more questions you can ask and the more you can talk, empty that bucket. You want to try and encourage them not to consume alcohol or drugs as well. I would never say to kind of take alcohol or drugs away from the person, because that doesn't ever work. But what you can do is try and encourage them to stop, because it's not ever going to help the situation.
And what if, I mean, you know, you need to ask that question, but actually what if you're struggling to then follow on with those questions? If they come back with the yes, I am feeling suicidal, how do you start the conversation in the first place, or is it something you go to somebody else?
No, I think that, it's a very natural reaction to be shocked by this, it's very natural reaction. But actually, we've got to come to this idea that if we don't start talking about this, and if we don't start asking these questions, this is going to continue to be a hidden problem, and this is going to continue to be a taboo. There are 16% of the population have felt suicidal at some point in time. So a huge percentage of people are going to, statistically, I think there's 30 something people, whatever it is here, at least 10 of us, sorry, not at least 3 of us are going to have felt suicidal at some point. And I think statistically, we've got to come to the understanding that this is an issue, and if we don't start talking about it, but also remember, as uncomfortable as you feel, if they are suicidal, it's nothing in comparison to how they feel at that point in time. So don't be afraid to kind of ask these questions and be open about it. What I will say is that you can refer to anybody who's had ASSIST training. So ASSIST is Applied Suicide Intervention Skills Training. It's a really useful course, and it's worth finding out if anybody within your organisation or within your kind of local area has had that training. Oh, it's gone off again. Right, also try not to act shocked. I think so try not to act shocked. So try not to kind of be like, oh my God, they've said they're suicidal. Remember to kind of try and calm and allow that person to kind of get everything out of their system and out of their bucket at that point in time. If you're starting to act shocked about the situation, it's just going to build up barriers between you and that person. Don't ever get involved physically as well. I think it's really important that you don't try and remove somebody away from a situation. You've got to be able to use your voice and use your kind of questioning and your kind of your manner to be able to kind of support somebody. Don't ever minimize or brush off the intensity of their feelings. One of the worst things you can do is say, well, it's not that bad, don't worry about it, as I mentioned before. And don't ever use guilt or ridicule. One of the worst things you can do to say to somebody is something along the lines of, well, think about your wife or think about your children. You don't know what's going on behind closed doors, and you don't know what's led that person to that point. But also I think it's important to remember, as I mentioned before, Dan was very open with the fact that one of the reasons he was killing himself was to make my children's life better. So if anyone would have said to him at that point, think about Emma and think about the kids, he would have probably said, well, this is why I'm doing it. So don't ever kind of use that guilt to try and guilt somebody out of doing this. Don't ever be sworn to secrecy as well. You don't want to get yourself involved that potentially be illegal, but it's really important to just keep talking and keep talking and talking and talking. Refer people to support as well. Support services are available, and the more you can get somebody to talk, you want them to get them right. Talk to them, but actually now you need help, because you can help them as much as you can by talking, but you're not going to be able to fix them and you can't make them better. But there is help out there that is available and that can support them. And one of the best things I can suggest is going onto the Farmwell website. So there's a Farmwell. There's Farmwell Wales, but there's also Farmwell in general, kind of national Farmwell, and there's lots of support services available on there that will be able to tell you where you can direct somebody to as well.
Emma, just if somebody knows that somebody is struggling and you think, gosh, I really would like to reach out and help them, but I don't know how to create an opportunity where either I can meet up with them or I could pop round and go and see them, what would be some helpful practical ways in which you could actually find a bit of bravery in yourself to then go, right, I'm going to go and ask this person for a cup of tea, or I'm going to go around and see them? How would you actually go practically around approaching somebody?
I think just do whatever you would do naturally. So if the person in question is perhaps somebody you'd bump into in the market, perhaps on a weekday, when you bump into them, show your concern for them. I think we've got to get away from this idea of that we're not allowed to express concern about people, that it's prying into people's lives, when actually if we're concerned about somebody, how often have we kind of bumped into somebody, walked away and been like, there's something not right with them, they're not quite themselves, but not done anything about it? And I think we've got to get away from that. And if we spot that something's not right, whatever you would normally do that. So for example, if you would drop somebody a text, drop them a text, are you all right? I've noticed things aren't quite right with you at the moment. Is everything okay? If you know somebody's going through a difficult time, pick up the phone and ask them, is everything okay at the moment? They might pretty well turn around and be like, yeah, everything's fine, when you probably know deep inside it's not. But don't give up at that point and just keep trying. But what I would say is just whatever way you feel comfortable, do it. There is no right or wrong way to approach people in this situation, but just approaching somebody and letting them know that you're there to talk to them, it just can mean the world in general. It doesn't have to be some kind of big, massive gesture. It can be something as simple as a text or a phone call, just to let them know that you're there if they need them.
And in agriculture, we have quite a big man-up culture. And do you think we're breaking those barriers down now? With there's lots of different initiatives going on, but do you think we are making any real progress?
I do. I've seen a massive change over the last, well, it's 4 years now this week that the charity started, and I've seen huge progress. You know, going back 4 years ago, nobody would talk about suicide or mental health or anything like that. Whereas now, you know, the fact that webinars like this are happening has shown how far we've come. The fact that we've got people who, when we have stands and stuff in shows, people come up to us and talk to us about it. And I think there is a massive shift, but there's still a lot of work to go. We've still got a bit of a culture where we're kind of just still cracking on, we still just man up and get on with it, and so there's still a long way to go with that support. And I think that that's something that as a community, the only way that can get better is by us working together. We've got to start having conversations around suicide, we've got to start having conversations around mental health, we've got to start picking up on these signs that when things aren't right and actually doing something about it, because the only way that this suicide rate is gonna drop, and the only way that we're actually going to make this situation better is us as a community doing something about it.
That's brilliant. And so we've got a few final questions, which I'm going to hand over to Caroline to ask you. We've been talking to Emma about what are the frequently asked things that she gets. So Caroline, do you want to run through those?
Will you ever make someone want to kill themselves by talking about it?
No. And in a quick answer, you'll never kind of put the idea into somebody's head. I think that's kind of the main concern that people have when they're asking about suicide in particular is, am I going to make them think about it? Am I going to put the idea in their head if they haven't already thought about it? And that's not the case at all. By asking somebody about suicide and talking about it, you're purely giving somebody who could potentially be suicidal the option to talk, whereas you're never going to actually make them think, oh no, but now you mentioned it, I'm going to try. It doesn't work like that at all, and there's a lot of research that's gone into this.
Okay, thank you, Emma. And is there an area where the suicide rate is actually higher?
So statistically, the suicide rate in Scotland is higher, with the second suicide rate being highest in Wales. And then England following that then. So there are certain areas that the suicide rate is higher, but the suicide rates within Scotland and England are dropping, whereas the suicide rates in Wales are actually rising, unfortunately. As you saw statistically earlier on, we know that men are high risk, and we also know that men under the age of 45 are really high risk as well. Suicide is the biggest killer of men under the age of 45. So there are certain kind of areas where there are risks and high risk factors, but actually male, female, well, no matter where you live or who you are, then, you know, the kind of wherever you are, you're at risk if if you're going through certain issues.
And what would you say is the best support for someone who is suicidal?
So one of the best things that anybody who is suicidal or even just suffering with poor mental health in general is getting therapy, and it's talking therapies. And I think one of the most common misconceptions around therapy and counselling in particular is that it's kind of something for like people in the films and like Americans and whatever else have you, and that's not the case at all. I strongly, firmly believe that anybody and everybody should be having counselling on a monthly basis at least. It's the ability to offload everything that is going on to somebody who is completely impartial to the situation. They can offer you advice, they can offer you tips and strategies on how to move through this, but more importantly, it's somebody to be able to empty that bucket to. Because one of the biggest problems that we face is people who are suicidal, although they perhaps want to empty their bucket, they don't know who to empty their bucket to, and they quite often don't want to put that burden on their friends and their families. So having a counsellor and having that therapy and that support can provide you with that opportunity to empty a bucket to somebody who you don't have to go back and see the next morning and worry about what they think.
Okay, and one more last question, Emma. So what is the most important thing that you can do to help somebody who is suicidal? What would you say would be the most important things are?
The single most important thing is just to talk. And as I said, suicide has a massive taboo. It's still, in our society, is still deemed as something which is just wrong and people shouldn't be doing it. And the fact it was illegal up until, not so many years ago, it shows kind of how society that we've been driven to look at suicide. We've now got to change our mindset around that. And if we start having open and honest conversations around suicide, we'll make it kind of commonplace. And as common as it is now for people to talk about cancer, and we see on the television about people checking their bits and bobs jobs on the telly and how we should be doing that regularly. We've now got to get to the same place with mental health and suicide, and about how those questions are just as important as checking our physical parts of our body. Asking about suicide should be a commonplace question. So the most important thing you can do to help somebody is just talk. Keep asking them questions. As you've probably gathered, talking is not something I struggle with. Shutting up is my massive problem, and talking slowly is another issue. But you know, generally just getting people to talk is just hugely important, and just keep thinking about that bucket. And the more you're talking and the more they respond to you, the bucket is emptying. Every time they respond, that bucket empties, and it's hugely important.
Thanks Emma.
So thanks for that, Caroline. And I think just bringing the webinar to a close, really, we've got a couple of other questions, but what we probably haven't said is exactly what DPJ Foundation actually offers people. Emma, do you want to run through that quickly?
Yeah, so as a charity, we do a few different things. As Caroline mentioned, we do mental health awareness training. So we actually go around and we provide training to anybody who wants to learn a little bit more about mental health and have the skills to be able to support somebody. What I always say is these aren't the skills to be able to fix people, because that's what professionals are there for. But you've got to imagine it like normal first aid. You put the plaster on to stop the bleeding until somebody can come along and stitch it up. And so that's what we do. We've been around and trained over 1,000 people now across the UK within kind of mental health awareness, and we've now developed an online course, because obviously at the moment I can't go here, there and everywhere. I loved my trip to Manchester when I went up to see Caroline, but unfortunately I'm not allowed out of Pembrokeshire currently. So we've developed an online service. If you're in Wales, there's currently some spaces available that Welsh Government have provided some training places. If you wanted to have a look at our Facebook page, you can access that training for free. But if anybody's interested in getting on that training and have a look at it, just get in touch, and we're happy to help you with that. The other aspect of what we do, and you can see the poster just down below here, is our Share the Load service. And so this is really looking at kind of making sure support is there within the community. And Share the Load is all about providing fully funded counselling for anybody within the agricultural sector. At the moment, that's just in Wales, because if I'm completely honest, when I started this 4 years ago, I didn't ever think I'd leave my little village, let alone go across Wales. So we're looking at how we can kind of take that further in the future. But it's all about making sure that people who have got poor mental health and who are suicidal have got really quick support and access to that support quickly. Current waiting times for mental health support are quite long across the country, and it's not really good enough. And within our sector that's got such a high suicide rate, it's really important that people have really quick access to that help. So we can provide a counsellor, whether it be on the phone, over something like this, over online, an online kind of Zoom or something like that. And we also offer counsellors who will go on to farm as well and provide that support in a place that they feel safe as well. So you can see the details for that below. And if you've got any kind of questions about any of that or any information about that, please get in touch.
I've got one question, and excuse me because I'm going to read it out, because I think a lot of people will be in this situation, and it's quite a serious one, to be honest. I'm a farmer and I work with farmers on a daily basis. I have a particular farmer who ticks all the boxes of your signs in suicide, and I've tried to get help but been told that the farmer has to go and get it himself. He's never going to do this. We all know those people, and if he finds out that I'm telling anyone else to help, I'm not sure what he'll do. It's a massive worry, and I feel like I'm hitting a brick wall whichever way I turn, and it's going to be too late. What can I do to help him?
So it is a really difficult situation, because there's an age-old saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And unfortunately, that's the same with kind of getting help across any of the board, really. You know, you can provide that person with the support and the help, but if they're not willing to take it, then it's really difficult. On the other hand, if that person is willing to have help, they're just not willing to take that first step. As a charity, we accept referrals from people like yourself. So if you wanted to ring on their behalf, you could ring us up. And then what we'd be able to do then is, as long as you tell it, you know, as long as he's given you permission, we can get the ball rolling with you and kind of you as our contact. Because I'm very aware of the fact that when my husband was alive, he wouldn't speak on the phone to anybody. And I remember myself trying to get through to a counsellor to try and get him help, and the counsellor said to me, your husband needs to ring me himself. And I was like, he won't even talk to me on the phone, he's not going to speak to you. But I just kept hitting these brick walls. So what we've tried to do as a charity is break down those brick walls and kind of allow as many options for people to get help as possible. What I would say is, don't give up. You know, keep talking to him, this person, keep asking him, keep providing him with information about what help is available. But you've got to remember that as long as you're talking to him, as long as you're asking him about suicide and you're providing that opportunity for him to talk, you're doing all you can. And I think that's really important to remember, that you can't take his problems and put them in your bucket, because your bucket will end up filling up as well, and that will kind of cause a huge amount of pressure for you. Do what you can, and you're only human at the end of the day. So ask him those questions, talk to him about suicide, show him all the help that is available that he can get, and if he's still not willing to do it, then you've still got to kind of just leave him and wait until he's ready. But don't be afraid to keep asking those questions, but please don't let it fill up your own bucket, because it's so easy to let that happen. And it's really important that you understand that a person has got to want to get better. You cannot force anybody to get better, but they've got to want it. And if they want it, the help is available out there.
That's really good. And one final question, because I'm conscious we have gone over time now, but I think they're really important questions. Why is it that suicide seems to be contagious in some areas? Or do you think that's more just awareness of what's happening now?
I think it's a bit of a tricky one. I think that, you know, statistically and you know, kind of a lot of research has gone into the fact that if you're open to suicide and it's been something that you're kind of very aware of, it's almost a much easier process than if it was something that you've never met anyone who's killed themselves, or it's never been part of your remit. It's a very kind of shocking thing to go through. But actually, if it's something that's happened quite regularly within your area or around you, it seems like a very simple process, because it's happened, so it's there, it's in the forefront of your mind. So I don't know whether it's kind of learnt behaviour, if it's nature, nurture, that kind of thing. But unfortunately, I think that the kind of more open that you are to it, that the more kind of it is there in front of you. And it is a difficult one, that one. But it does seem to be at points, it does look like there's pockets of places that there are kind of suicides. And I think the only thing we can take away from that is if we do have a suicide within a specific area, and it is the area you live in, it's even more of a kind of advantage to be able to go out and talk about it and kind of have these discussions around it. And kind of make sure that hopefully it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, and I think that the strong message from me on this one is just start the conversation, isn't it? Just we can all do that in some shape or form.
Yeah, and don't be afraid of it. I think so many people are afraid of suicide and what it entails and what it is, but actually we've got to start having those conversations, like they're everyday conversations. We've got to start using the word suicide. And I'll never forget that I had an email from a guy once who told me that I use the word suicide too much, and that I should say that my husband took his own life. And my response to him, and I'm really rubbish at replying to emails, but my response to him immediately was, well, okay, you explain to my children then how their dad took his own life, because their response would be, well, if he took it, it can come back. So, you know, we've got to start using the language around this. It's horrible and it's crap and it's not a nice thing, but that's what it is. And it is a real issue. And if we don't start using that language, it's going to continue to be a problem. The more we can have conversations, and I've become kind of this person who, the minute I get any inclination that something's wrong with somebody in my immediate circle, I'm like, are you suicidal? You know, straight away. And I will ask again and again and again, because I'm not risking it. I'm not risking kind of having that. And, you know, kind of on a final note, having lived through what I've lived through, it's rubbish. And you don't ever want to be that person that's been left behind because of suicide, and it leaves you in all sorts of manner of mentally, it kind of destroys you, and for the rest of your life it lives with you. You know, I'm always going to be the widow whose husband killed herself, and that's awful, because I still don't understand really what happened to Dan either. So I think that, you know, it's better to ask and ask and ask rather than the alternative happen, which doesn't bear kind of living with, really.
Yeah. And yeah, Caroline, have you got any final points you want to wrap up with?
No, just to say thank you for everybody who's taken the time to get involved this evening. And as always, Emma has done an inspirational job of just helping us all to find a way to actually get a little bit more comfortable about talking about how our head is, how our bucket is, and the more people that find a way in their own little way, and I think that's what's really important. There is no right or wrong with this, and it's whether you're the person who's struggling or whether you're the person who's on the receiving end of somebody who's been so brave to actually reach out to you and to want to try and talk to you because they trust you. And I think if you're on the receiving end, don't underestimate actually just how much you can really help somebody purely just by listening, because that person who's reached out, they've been incredibly brave by reaching out to you. So just listen and be there for them, and then see if you can subtly help and guide them. And I think as long as there are more people from across the industry, I work for a retailer, but I come from a farming background as well, and I live on a farm, so I've got lots of farming friends. So I think the more people who just get okay with saying I'm not okay, then the more good we can do to help each other. So that's what I'd like to finish with.
Thank you very much. So, I mean, normally when we finish these webinars, we have our own contact details up there, but AHDB is really not the place to come when you need the support. There's experts out there that are willing to help you, and there's a variety of different numbers, and as you'll see over the next 6 weeks, they all offer a slightly different element of support. But don't be frightened to ring any of them, because they all work together and they would pass you on to anybody as well. So any of those numbers would be a very good first point of call. And like Emma said, that some of those are printed off as well. We can make sure we could get you some hard copies as well, because that's actually one of the papers that flies off our desks when we do exhibitions and events, is actually the mental health ones that people just quietly take away and either read for themselves or they drop on someone else's desk for the right reasons. So if you need any of the printed publications, get in touch with us. But if you really want that direct support, then please do speak to the charities. And I'm just going to sign off because now we're late, and I don't like taking up people's evenings, but I think it's been a really important message, and I'm really grateful, Emma, that you can talk so openly about what your experience, and actually we can drive this forward to help the industry as well. So thank you very much, and thanks, Caroline, for all your support as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. If you do have any further questions, then by all means get in touch with one of us, and we'll be on next week as well. Thank you very much. Bye.